Chapter 1. The Dungeon of Forgotten Souls. The iron door slammed shut with a finality that echoed through Ilara's bones. Darkness swallowed her whole, thick, suffocating darkness that tasted of copper and decay. She stumbled forward, her bare feet sliding across stone slick with something she refused to name. The air down here was wrong. Cold, yes, but also alive with a hunger that pressed against her skin like invisible mouths. "Please," she had begged, as the guards dragged her through the palace corridors. "Please, there's been a mistake. I'm innocent." But her sister Vivienne had stood at the top of the marble staircase in Ilara's stolen gown, pearls gleaming at her throat, crimson lips curved in a smile that held no warmth, only triumph. "Take her to the blood cells," Vivienne had commanded, her voice carrying the authority of the king's beloved. Let the vampire court decide her fate. And they had. Oh, they had. Now Ilara pressed her back against the cold stone wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The dungeon stretched endlessly before her, a labyrinth of corridors carved deep beneath the palace, so deep that even screams would never reach the surface. This was where traitors were sent. Where those accused of conspiring against the crown were left to rot. Or worse. Because these weren't ordinary dungeons. These were the blood cells. Prison chambers built centuries ago when the vampire court still ruled openly, before the Treaty of Shadows forced them into the margins of society. Before they became myths whispered in firelight. Except they weren't myths. Ilara had always known. Everyone knew, even if they pretended otherwise. The aristocracy still bore the ancient bloodlines. The king's court still observed the old rituals, and in the deepest chambers of the palace, the vampire lord still held dominion over those condemned to the cells, feeding grounds. That's what these dungeons truly were. Her fingers found the wall's rough surface and she forced herself to move forward. Somewhere in this darkness, there had to be another way out. There had to be. She couldn't die here. Not for crimes she hadn't committed, not so Vivienne could steal the life that should have been hers. Their father's estate, the marriage arrangement to Lord Ashford, the dowry that would secure their family's future. Vivienne had wanted it all, and Ilara had been too trusting to see the blade until it was already buried between her ribs. Metaphorically, she reminded herself, though down here, the literal version seemed increasingly inevitable. A sound drifted through the darkness. Ilara froze. It came again. A whisper of movement, silk against stone. Footsteps, impossibly light. And then, breathing, slow, measured, as though whatever approached, had all the time in the world. "Who's there?" Her voice cracked, betraying her terror. The footsteps stopped. Silence pressed down like a living thing, and Ilara's heart hammered so violently she thought it might tear free from her chest. Her eyes strained against the darkness, searching for any hint of movement, any shape that might resolve into something she could understand. Then, from the blackness directly before her, a voice emerged. "You shouldn't be here." The sound wrapped around her like velvet and frost, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Male, certainly, but layered with something ancient, something that had known centuries of nights and still found them wanting. Ilara's knees trembled. "I was brought here, accused of... I know what you were accused of." The voice moved closer, though she still couldn't see him. Conspiracy. Theft. Attempted poisoning of the king's intended bride. A pause, heavy with dark amusement. "Your sister has quite the imagination." "You know?" Hope flared in her chest, desperate and painful. "Then you know I'm innocent. You have to help me." "Have to?" The temperature dropped 10 degrees. And then he was there, emerging from shadow as though the darkness itself had given him form. Moonlight filtered through some unseen crack in the stone above, painting him in silver and midnight. Tall, impossibly so, with a face carved from aristocratic angles and cruel beauty. His hair fell past his shoulders, black as a raven's wing, and his eyes, God help her, his eyes. They burned like embers in the gloom, not red, but amber touched with gold, holding depths that spoke of ages she couldn't comprehend. He wore formal attire that belonged to another century, a black velvet coat with silver embroidery, a cravat of midnight silk, boots that reached his knees. Everything about him screamed nobility. Everything except the way he looked at her, like a predator considering whether the prey was worth the hunt. "I don't have to do anything," he said softly, taking a step closer. "These are my dungeons, little mortal. My domain. Every soul that passes through these doors belongs to me." Vampire. The word crystallized in her mind with perfect, terrible clarity. Not some minor bloodline noble playing at immortality, but something far older. Something that had watched empires rise and crumble, that had fed on centuries of prisoners, and still found the hunger unsatisfied. She should run. Every instinct screamed at her to flee. But there was nowhere to go. And beneath the terror, beneath the primal understanding that she was prey in the presence of an apex predator, something else stirred. Something that recognized him, though she had never seen his face before this moment. "I know you," her soul whispered. "I've always known you." "What's your name?" The question escaped before she could stop it. His head tilted, studying her with an intensity that stripped away every defense, every pretense. For a moment, something flickered across his perfect features. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition of his own. Cassius. The name fell between them like a dropped stone. "Lord Cassius Ravencroft, if you care for formalities." His lips curved into something too sharp to be called a smile. "And you, condemned girl, are either remarkably brave or remarkably foolish to ask questions of the monster sent to devour you. Will you?" Her voice steadied, finding strength she didn't know she possessed. "Devour me?" Cassius moved with inhuman speed, closing the distance until mere inches separated them. His hand rose, cold fingers trailing along her jaw, tilting her face toward the thin shaft of moonlight. "That," he murmured, his thumb brushing across her racing pulse, "remains to be seen." Chapter 2. The Mark of Ancient Dreams. Ilara should have pulled away. Every rational thought screamed at her to recoil from his touch, to put distance between herself and the creature whose fingers rested against her throat with such intimate familiarity. But her body refused to obey. Instead, she found herself leaning into that cold palm, drawn by something deeper than fear, stronger than self-preservation. "You're not afraid," Cassius observed, his voice carrying a note of genuine curiosity. "Your heart races?" "Yes, but not with terror." "How peculiar." "I am afraid," Ilara whispered. "I'm terrified." "And yet you don't flee." His thumb pressed more firmly against her pulse, feeling the blood surge beneath her skin. Why? Because she had dreamed of him. The realization struck her with the force of a physical blow, memories cascading through her mind like water through a broken dam. Dreams that had haunted her since childhood, visions of a dark figure standing in moonlit gardens, calling to her in a voice that made her soul ache with longing. She had always dismissed them as nightmares born from the gothic tales her mother read before bed, but they hadn't been nightmares at all. "I've seen you before," she breathed. "In my dreams. You were always there, waiting in the shadows, calling my name." Something flickered in those amber eyes, recognition perhaps, or something far more dangerous. His hand fell away from her throat, and he took a deliberate step backward, putting distance between them as though he were the one who needed protection. "Impossible," he said, but his voice had lost its cruel amusement. Now it carried an edge of something that might have been fear, if vampires were capable of such mortal emotions. You stood beneath a blood moon, Alara continued, the memories flooding back with increasing clarity. In a garden of night-blooming flowers, you reached for me, and I could feel your grief, centuries of it, drowning me. You said. She closed her eyes, grasping for the words that had echoed through 1,000 sleeping hours. You said, "Come back to me. Please, come back." The silence that followed was absolute. When Alara opened her eyes, Cassius had moved to the far side of the cell, his back pressed against the stone as though the wall were the only thing keeping him upright. His carefully constructed mask of predatory indifference had shattered, revealing something raw and wounded beneath. "What is your bloodline?" His voice cut through the darkness like a blade. "Your family name, tell me." "Thornwick," she stammered. "House Thornwick of Thornwick." He repeated the name as though it were a curse and a prayer combined. Of course it would be Thornwick. A bitter laugh escaped him, devoid of humor. "The universe has a twisted sense of irony. I don't understand. Your ancestor." Cassius turned to face her, and the anguish in his eyes made her chest constrict. 3 centuries ago, there was a woman named Isolde Thornwick. She was... He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. She was everything. My beloved. My covenant-bound. My eternal companion. Past tense. The weight of it settled over Alara like a burial shroud. What happened to her? She died. The words fell like stones into still water. Vampire hunters found us on the eve of her transformation. They believed they were saving her soul, purging her of demonic corruption. They burned her alive while I was forced to watch, bound in silver chains blessed by priests who thought themselves righteous. Horror washed through Alara in cold waves. "I'm sorry. Don't." His voice turned sharp. "Don't offer me pity. I've had 300 years to make peace with my grief." But the tremor in his hand suggested otherwise. "What I don't understand is why you bear her face, why you dream my memories, why you stand before me now, in the very dungeons where I swore never to feel anything again." Ilara's mind raced, connecting pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed. "Blood memory," she whispered. "The old texts in my father's library mentioned it. That vampire blood could pass memories through generations, that covenant bonds could echo through bloodlines even after death." "You've read the forbidden texts. Not a question, an accusation. My mother believed in the old ways. Before she died, she made me promise to remember them, to honor the truth that others had forgotten." Alara took a tentative step toward him. "She said our family had been marked by the vampire courts long ago, that we carried an ancient debt. Or an ancient promise." Cassius's gaze locked onto hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "Isolde made me swear in her final moments that I would find her again. That love as deep as ours couldn't be extinguished by something as mundane as death. I thought she was delirious with pain, offering me false comfort. But what if she wasn't?" The words tumbled from Alara's lips before she could stop them. "What if souls could return? What if she—" "Don't." He moved with supernatural speed suddenly before her again, his hands gripping her shoulders with barely restrained force. "Don't offer me hope. Hope is more cruel than any torture these dungeons could devise." But even as he spoke, his eyes traced her features with desperate hunger. The curve of her cheek, the shape of her lips, the exact shade of her dark hair, looking for echoes of a woman 3 centuries dead. "I'm not her," Alara said softly. "I'm not Isolde." "No." His grip loosened, becoming almost gentle. "But you dream her dreams, you carry her blood, and you were thrown into my domain on the night of a blood moon, the same phase that hung in the sky the night she died." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, tracing the path of tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Tell me, Alara Thornwick, do you believe in fate?" Before she could answer, a sound echoed through the dungeon corridors. Heavy footsteps, multiple guards, and a voice that made Ilara's blood run cold. Vivienne. Is she dead yet? Her sister's voice rang out sharp with impatience. The vampire lord was promised a condemned prisoner. Surely he's finished feeding by now. Cassius's expression hardened, the vulnerable moment shattering like glass. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute command. Stay behind me. Whatever happens next, trust that I will not let them take you. Chapter 3. The Covenant of Shadows. Torchlight spilled into the corridor like liquid fire, casting distorted shadows across the dungeon walls. Ilara pressed herself against the cold stone behind Cassius, her heart hammering as footsteps grew closer. Measured, confident, accompanied by the metallic clink of armor and weapons. Lord Ravencroft? A guard's voice echoed through the darkness, respectful but wary. We've brought the Lady Vivienne, as requested. I made no such request. Cassius's tone could have frozen blood. The condemned prisoner was delivered to me. That concludes our arrangement. Yes, my lord, but the lady insists. I don't particularly care what the lady insists. Each word dripped with aristocratic disdain. These are my chambers, my domain. Or have the mortal courts forgotten the terms of our treaty? Silence fell, thick with tension. Ilara could hear her sister's sharp intake of breath, could imagine the fury contorting Vivienne's beautiful features. For all her scheming, Vivienne had never been good at hiding her emotions when things didn't proceed according to plan. Forgive me, Lord Ravencroft. Vivienne's voice emerged honey-sweet, laced with false deference. I merely wished to ensure the prisoner met appropriate justice. She committed grave crimes against the crown. Did she? Cassius moved forward, his silhouette cutting through the torchlight like a blade. Or did someone commit crimes and require a convenient scapegoat? The temperature in the corridor plummeted. Ilara watched frost form across the stones, spreading outward from where Cassius stood. The guards shifted nervously, hands moving toward weapons they wouldn't dare draw. I don't know what you're implying, Vivienne began. Don't you? Cassius's laugh was devoid of warmth. I've walked this earth for 7 centuries, girl. I've witnessed every form of human treachery imaginable. Did you truly believe I wouldn't recognize the stench of betrayal, the desperation of ambition? The evidence against my sister is overwhelming, Vivienne pressed, though her voice had lost some of its certainty. The poison found in her chambers, the correspondence with enemies of the state, evidence that materialized rather conveniently after you secured your position as the king's intended bride. Cassius tilted his head, studying her with the clinical interest of a predator assessing wounded prey. Tell me, how long did it take to forge those letters? To plant the poison where it would be discovered? Ilara's breath caught. She had suspected, of course, knew in her bones that Vivienne had orchestrated everything. But hearing it spoken aloud, having her innocence acknowledged by this ancient creature. You overstep, vampire. Vivienne's mask slipped, revealing the venom beneath. The treaty grants you dominion over these dungeons, yes, but it does not permit you to interfere in matters of royal justice. Royal justice? Cassius's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than a shout. Is that what you call it when an innocent woman is thrown to monsters so you can steal her inheritance and her future? He moved closer to the bars separating them, and even the guards retreated a step. Let me make something abundantly clear, Lady Vivienne. The prisoner you delivered to these cells is under my protection now. She belongs to me. And I do not share. The possessiveness in those words sent a shiver down Ilara's spine, part fear, part something far more dangerous. The law states that condemned prisoners forfeit all rights upon entering the blood cells, Vivienne argued, though panic had begun creeping into her voice. She's yours to feed upon, nothing more. The law also states that any prisoner who survives 3 nights in these dungeons is granted freedom. Cassius's smile revealed the sharp points of his fangs, gleaming in the torchlight. Or did you forget that particular clause? It was written in blood after all, quite literally. Vivian's face drained of color. 3 nights? That's impossible. No one survives. No one has survived, Cassius corrected. But that doesn't mean no one can. And I have decided that this particular prisoner will not only survive, but will walk free when the 3rd dawn breaks. He paused, letting the words sink in. Unless, of course, you wish to challenge my authority here? To break the treaty that keeps the vampire courts from reclaiming their full power over the mortal realm? The threat hung in the air like an executioner's blade. This isn't over, Vivian hissed. The king will hear of this. He'll do nothing. Cassius's voice turned almost bored. The king knows better than to anger the old bloodlines over one girl's fate, especially when that girl was condemned on such flimsy evidence. His eyes glowed brighter in the darkness. Now leave, before I forget the constraints of civility and remember why your ancestors feared the night. For a long moment Vivian stood frozen, rage and fear warring across her features. Then she turned sharply, skirts swirling, and stalked back down the corridor. The guards scrambled to follow, their relief palpable. The torchlight faded. Darkness reclaimed the dungeon. Ilara released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. You saved me. I claimed you. Cassius turned to face her, and in the shadows, his eyes burned like coals. There's a difference. One implies altruism. The other. He moved closer until she could feel the cold radiating from his skin. The other implies ownership. I don't understand. 3 nights, he said softly. That's how long the treaty grants me absolute dominion over any prisoner in these cells. 3 nights during which no mortal law can touch you. No accuser can reach you. His hand rose, fingers hovering just above her cheek without quite making contact. But there's a price for such protection, Ilara Thornwick. Her throat went dry. What price? Blood. The word fell between them like a stone into still water. The covenant that will keep you alive, that will bind you to my protection and ensure Vivian cannot simply have you killed the moment you step beyond these walls. It requires a blood exchange. My essence in your veins. Your life force mingled with my death. You want to turn me into a vampire? No. His expression softened slightly. Not unless you choose transformation when the 3 nights end. This is different. A temporary bond. A mark that will tell every creature of the night that you are mine. Untouchable. Sacred. Ilara's mind raced. 3 nights of safety versus a lifetime of Vivian's schemes. Protection from a monster versus vulnerability to her sister's poison. If I refuse? Cassius's jaw tightened. Then I honor my word and release you at dawn, and Vivian will have you dead before sunset. It wasn't really a choice at all. Ilara lifted her chin, meeting his burning gaze. What do I need to do? Chapter 4. The Crimson Binding. Cassius led her deeper into the dungeons, away from the outer cells where torchlight could still reach. They descended stone steps worn smooth by centuries of footfalls, passing through archways carved with symbols that predated any language Ilara recognized. The air grew colder with each step, thick with an ancient power that made her skin prickle. Where are we going? Her voice echoed strangely in the narrow passage, as though the stones themselves were listening. My sanctum. Cassius didn't look back. The blood covenant requires privacy. Sacred ground. It cannot be performed in those outer chambers where guards and prisoners have tainted the air with fear and death. They emerged into a vast chamber that stole Ilara's breath. It was beautiful in the way that crypts could be beautiful, solemn and terrible and achingly elegant. The ceiling arched high overhead, supported by columns carved to resemble ancient trees, their stone branches intertwining in a canopy of shadows. Candles burned in alcoves along the walls, hundreds of them, their flames dancing without any breeze to move them. In the center of the chamber stood a raised dais, and upon it, an altar of black marble veined with silver. "This was once a temple," Cassius said quietly, his voice carrying a reverence she hadn't heard before. "Built by the first vampire lords when we still walked openly among mortals, before fear turned us into myths, before treaties and hiding." He moved toward the altar, his fingers trailing across its surface. "Isolde and I were to be bound here 300 years ago. I had prepared everything. The ritual, the words, the blood ceremony that would make her my eternal companion." Ilara's chest tightened. But the hunters came first. They came the night before. His hand curled into a fist against the marble. "I've kept this chamber sealed ever since. Couldn't bear to enter it, to see the altar prepared for a covenant that would never be completed." He finally turned to face her. "Until tonight." The weight of what he wasn't saying pressed down on Ilara like a physical force. This wasn't just about protecting her from Vivienne. This was about confronting 3 centuries of grief, of stepping back into a moment that had destroyed him. "We don't have to do this here," she said softly. "If it's too painful, pain is all I have left of her." Cassius's smile was bitter. "At least it was, until you appeared in my dungeon, speaking her dreams, wearing her face." He gestured to the altar. "Come, we're wasting darkness, and the covenant must be completed before dawn." Ilara climbed the dais steps, her bare feet silent against the cold stone. Up close, she could see that the altar's surface was inscribed with intricate patterns, spirals and crescents that seemed to shift in the candlelight, forming words in a language she couldn't read but somehow understood. Blood calls to blood, soul binds to soul. Death embraces life eternal. "Give me your hand," Cassius commanded, his voice taking on a formal cadence. She extended her right hand, trembling slightly. He took it in both of his, and the cold of his touch sent shivers racing up her arm. With his left hand, he produced a silver dagger from his coat, the blade so thin it looked like crystallized moonlight. "This will hurt," he warned, "but the pain is necessary. The blood must be freely given, freely received. No compulsion, no manipulation, only choice." Ilara nodded, not trusting her voice. The blade kissed her palm, parting skin with surgical precision. Blood welled immediately, dark red, almost black in the candlelight. The pain was sharp but clean, more shock than agony. Cassius held her hand over the altar, letting drops fall onto the marble. Where they landed, the silver veins began to glow with soft luminescence. "Your blood recognizes this place," he murmured, wonder coloring his tone. "It remembers." Before she could ask what he meant, he drew the blade across his own palm. His blood was different, darker than hers, moving with an otherworldly slowness, as though it carried the weight of centuries. When it touched the altar alongside hers, the entire chamber erupted with light. The candles blazed brighter. The symbols carved into the columns began to glow, and the blood on the altar, mortal and immortal mingled, started to sing. Not with sound, but with a vibration that Ilara felt in her bones, her teeth, the very marrow of her being. Cassius pressed his bleeding palm against hers, their fingers intertwining. The moment their blood touched, the world shifted. Ilara gasped as memories that weren't hers flooded her mind, visions of this same chamber hundreds of years ago, filled with witnesses dressed in elaborate Gothic finery. A woman stood before the altar, dark-haired and beautiful, her face identical to Ilara's own. Isolde. She was smiling as Cassius lifted her hand to his lips as he whispered words of eternal devotion. Then the vision shattered. Fire and screams, silver chains, Isolde burning, 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 while Cassius howled her name. Stop. Cassius's voice cut through the nightmare, pulling her back to the present. Don't look at the ending. Look at what came before. The vision shifted. She saw Isolde and Cassius walking through moonlit gardens, his coat draped over her shoulders against the cold. Saw them in a library, her head resting on his shoulder as he read aloud from ancient texts. Saw them dancing at a masquerade ball, their movements perfect synchronization, as though they shared one soul between two bodies. Saw Isolde laughing, her hand pressed against Cassius's chest. Promise me, she was saying, if something happens, if we're separated, promise you'll find me again, in this life or the next. I promise, past Cassius had replied, his voice thick with emotion. I'll search through eternity if I must. I'll know you by your soul, even if everything else changes. The memory faded. Alara found herself staring into Cassius's eyes, the present version, ancient and wounded and terrified of hope. The bond is formed, he whispered. I can feel you now. Your heartbeat. Your fear. Your... He paused, something like awe crossing his features. Your soul. And it's singing a song I thought I'd forgotten. Alara's palm burned where their blood mingled, but beneath the pain was something else. A connection she couldn't name. She could feel him too. His loneliness, his hunger, his desperate, aching need to believe that love could survive death itself. 3 nights, she breathed. What happens after 3 nights? You choose. His thumb stroked across her wrist, feeling her pulse. Freedom and mortality, or eternity with a monster who loved you before you were born. Chapter 5. Echoes of the Bloodline. The bond settled into Alara's veins like winter frost crystallizing across glass, beautiful, intricate, and utterly foreign. She could feel Cassius now, a constant presence at the edge of her consciousness. His emotions bled into hers. Caution warring with desire, grief tangled with something that might have been joy. How long does it last? She asked, flexing her fingers. The cut on her palm had already closed, leaving only a thin silver scar that glimmered in the candlelight. 3 nights, as promised. Cassius released her hand with obvious reluctance. Unless you choose to make it permanent, the mark will fade at dawn on the 4th day, and with it, my ability to protect you from mortal harm. He turned away, his shoulders tense beneath the velvet coat. You should rest. The blood exchange will exhaust you once the initial euphoria fades. But Alara wasn't tired. She felt more awake than she had in years, every sense heightened to impossible clarity. She could hear water dripping somewhere in the distant corridors, could smell the ancient stone and melted wax and something else, something uniquely Cassius, like midnight gardens and starry books and blood-soaked earth. I want to understand, she said, moving around the altar to face him. You said Isolde's bloodline continued after her death. How? If she died before the transformation, she had a younger sister. Cassius's jaw tightened. Meredith Thornwick. Barely 16 when Isolde burned. I didn't know about her until years later. I was not myself for a long time after. His eyes grew distant. When I finally emerged from my grief enough to think clearly, I sought out what remained of the Thornwick family. Found Meredith married with 3 children. She took one look at me and knew exactly who I was. What did she say? She told me that Isolde had visited her the night before the hunters came, said her sister seemed agitated, frightened, as though she knew something terrible was approaching. Cassius moved to one of the chamber's alcoves, retrieving a small wooden box from a hidden shelf. Isolde gave her this, made her swear to pass it down through the female line, generation after generation, until the right woman came to claim it. He held the box out to Alara. It was carved from dark wood, inlaid with silver symbols that matched those on the altar. Her fingers trembled as she took it, feeling the weight of centuries in something so small. "Open it," Cassius urged softly. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, lay 3 items: a silver locket, a dried rose preserved impossibly well for its age, and a folded letter sealed with red wax. The seal bore the imprint of 2 intertwined crescents, a symbol Elara recognized from her mother's old journals. "The Thornwick covenant mark," she whispered. "My mother wore this symbol on a pendant. She said it was our family's protection, though she never explained what we needed protection from." "Open the letter." Elara's hand shook as she broke the seal. The paper crackled, brittle with age, but the words remained clear, written in an elegant script that could have been her own. "To she who dreams of darkness and finds comfort there, if you are reading this, then my beloved has found you, has recognized in you what I could not complete in myself, the bridge between mortal and immortal, the soul that refuses to forget. Know this. I go to my death with neither regret nor fear. The hunters believe they can sever our bond with fire and prayer, but they understand nothing of what Cassius and I share. Love like ours doesn't end. It transforms. It waits. I have seen the future in blood visions, a gift the covenant gave me before it was completed. I have seen you, daughter of my bloodline, standing where I stood, choosing what I could not. And I have seen him, my eternal beloved, whole again after centuries of breaking. Do not pity him his grief. Grief is love's shadow, and shadows prove the light once existed. 3 nights you have, 3 chances to decide, but know that the choice was made long before you were born, written in blood and stars and the space between heartbeats. Find him, choose him, complete what we began. Yours across time. Isolde tears blurred Elara's vision. She read the letter twice more, her heart hammering against her ribs. She knew. Somehow she knew I would exist. Blood memory works both ways, Cassius said quietly. The covenant, even uncompleted, gave her glimpses of what might be. Futures branching like tree roots through time. He took the letter from her shaking hands, his fingers gentle. I thought it was madness. Grief-induced delusion. But then you appeared in my dungeon, speaking words from my dreams, and I began to wonder if souls could find each other again. Elara's voice barely rose above a whisper. If love could transcend death. Don't. The word came out harsh, pained. Don't make this about destiny or fate or whatever romantic notion you're constructing. You're not her, Elara. You're your own person with your own life. Or you would be, if your sister hadn't tried to have you murdered. He stepped back, putting distance between them. The bond keeps you safe. That's all. In 3 nights, you walk free and forget this ever happened. But the bond between them pulsed with his lie. She felt his longing, his desperate hope wrapped in layers of protective cynicism. Felt how much it cost him to stand there and push her away when everything in him wanted to pull her close. What if I don't want to forget? The words escaped before she could stop them. Cassius went utterly still. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. Don't offer me hope, Elara. I've lived without it for 300 years. I've learned to prefer the certainty of emptiness over the agony of possibility. But what if... A sound shattered the moment, a crash from somewhere above, followed by shouts and the ring of steel on steel. Cassius's head snapped toward the chamber entrance, his body tensing into a predator's crouch. Impossible, he breathed. No one would dare. The smell of smoke drifted down the stone stairs. Fire. Someone had brought fire into the vampire's domain. Chapter 6. The Hunter's Flame. Stay here. Cassius moved toward the chamber entrance with inhuman speed, his entire demeanor transforming. Gone was the melancholic lord haunted by lost love. In his place stood something ancient and lethal, a predator whose patience had finally been exhausted. But Alara could feel his fear through the bond. Not for himself. Vampires feared fire, yes, but he was old enough and powerful enough to survive. No, his terror was for her. Mortal. Fragile. Bound to him by blood but still capable of dying. I'm not staying here while you... They've come for you. His voice cut like a blade. Can't you feel it? Through the bond? He turned, and his eyes had changed. No longer amber and gold, but burning crimson, pupils elongated like a cat's. Your sister has hired vampire hunters, the same zealots who murdered Isolde. The realization hit Alara like a physical blow. The fire is meant to smoke us out, to force me to choose between protecting you and protecting myself. His lips pulled back, revealing fangs that seemed longer now, sharper. She's cleverer than I gave her credit for. She knew I wouldn't simply let you die, knew the bond would compel me to act. More shouts echoed from above, followed by the unmistakable sound of something heavy being dragged across stone. Building a pyre, Alara realized with mounting horror. They were building a funeral pyre at the dungeon's entrance, sealing them in with smoke and flame. There has to be another way out, she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. There is. Cassius moved back to her with that unnatural speed, gripping her shoulders. But you won't like it. Tell me. The catacombs beneath this chamber connect to the old cathedral crypts. They were part of the original vampire sanctuary before the treaty. But the passages are narrow, flooded in places, and completely dark. You'll never make it alone. Alara understood what he wasn't saying. But you could carry me? Move fast enough to outrun the smoke? Yes. His grip tightened. But it would require me to change. Fully. No more pretense of humanity. No more aristocratic facade. You would see what I truly am. Smoke was already creeping down the stairs, gray tendrils reaching into the chamber like ghostly fingers. Alara's eyes began to water, her throat burning with each breath. I'm bound to you by blood, she said, meeting his crimson gaze without flinching. I've read Isolde's letter. I've felt your grief in my bones. Do you really think seeing your true form will frighten me more than burning alive? Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or admiration. You have her courage, he murmured, that same reckless bravery that made me fall in love with her. Then stop wasting time and change. Cassius released her, stepping back. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his body began to shift. Not grotesquely, but with a terrible elegance, like watching a statue come to life. He grew taller, his frame expanding with muscle and sinew, his hands elongated, fingers tipped with claws like black glass. His face remained recognizable but sharper now, more angular, cheekbones cutting shadows across pale skin that seemed to glow with its own luminescence. But it was his wings that stole Alara's breath. They unfurled from his back like living darkness. Vast and terrible and beautiful, each one easily spanning 15 feet. Not the leathery bat wings of folklore, but something more ethereal, as though shadows themselves had taken form and substance. They moved like silk in water, catching the candlelight and reflecting it back as starlight. God, Alara breathed. Not quite. His voice had deepened, taking on harmonic undertones that resonated in her chest. Are you certain you won't run screaming? In answer, she stepped forward and placed her hand against his chest. His skin was cold as marble but smooth as silk, and beneath her palm she could feel something that might have been a heartbeat. Slow, deliberate, like a drum counting centuries instead of seconds. I'm certain, she whispered. The smoke was thicker now, rolling into the chamber in earnest. Shouts from above grew louder. The hunters were descending, emboldened by their fire. Alara could hear the distinctive sound of crossbows being cocked, could smell the acrid scent of blessed oils meant to burn vampire flesh. Hold on to me, Cassius commanded. Don't let go, no matter what you see or hear. Alara wrapped her arms around his neck. He lifted her as though she weighed nothing, one arm supporting her back, while the other cradled her legs. His wings folded around them both, creating a cocoon of darkness. The passages will be disorienting, he warned. You may see things. Echoes of the past, memories trapped in stone. The catacombs remember everything that's died within them. Close your eyes if it becomes too much. I won't. He moved. The world became a blur of motion and shadow. Cassius leaped from the dais, landing at the chamber's far wall where a section of stone swung inward at his touch. A hidden door she'd never have found alone. Beyond lay passages carved from living rock, slick with moisture and utterly black. But Cassius didn't need light. He moved through the darkness with absolute certainty, his wings occasionally brushing the narrow walls, his feet finding purchase on stones worn smooth by underground water. Alara buried her face against his chest, feeling his supernatural strength in every leap, every turn. True to his warning, she began to see things, ghostly figures flickering in and out of existence. Vampires from centuries past, walking these same corridors. Victims, too, their spectral forms reaching out with hollow eyes. The catacombs were haunted by more than memory. They were saturated with death itself. Behind them, the hunters' shouts grew, distant, then vanished entirely as Cassius put impossible distance between them and the dungeon. But Alara could still smell smoke, could hear the crackle of flames consuming the temple where Isolde should have been transformed 300 years ago. History repeating itself. Fire claiming what it had claimed before. How much farther? She gasped. Not far. But she felt his exhaustion through the bond. The effort of maintaining his true form while moving at such speed was draining even his ancient reserves. There's a chapel. Abandoned. We'll be safe there until... He stumbled. For the first time since entering the passages, Cassius's perfect grace faltered. His shoulder struck the wall, wings folding awkwardly as he fought to maintain his grip on Alara. What's wrong? Panic seized her chest. The smoke. His voice had grown strained, some of it blessed, poisoned. He coughed, and in the darkness she saw something dark stain his lips. Blood. They came. Prepared. Chapter 7. Blood Debt. Cassius collapsed against the catacomb wall, his wings dissolving back into shadow as his body began reverting to its more human form. The transformation looked painful this time, muscles spasming, bones shifting with audible cracks. Alara caught him as he slid toward the ground, her arms barely strong enough to support his weight. No. No, no, she whispered, lowering them both to the cold stone floor. Stay with me. You have to stay with me. His eyes flickered between crimson and amber, struggling to focus. Blood, darker than any mortal's, seeped from the corner of his mouth. When he coughed, more spattered across his lips, gleaming wetly in the faint luminescence that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Blessed incense, he managed, each word clearly costing him. Mixed with consecrated oils, old magic, the kind that burns from within. His hand found hers, gripping weakly. You need to keep moving. Follow the left passages. They lead to the cathedral crypts. From there, I'm not leaving you. Alara pressed her free hand against his chest, feeling that strange, not quite heartbeat stuttering beneath her palm. Through the bond, she could sense his life force, ancient and vast as an ocean, beginning to ebb. Tell me how to help you. There has to be something. Blood. The word escaped as barely a whisper. Fresh blood. Untainted. It might purge the poison. His eyes closed, jaw clenching against obvious pain. But I won't take from you. The bond is too new. Would drain you completely. Alara's mind raced, They were trapped in pitch-black catacombs, hunters somewhere behind them, and the only thing that could save Cassius was the one thing he refused to take. She looked down at their joined hands, at the silver scar glowing faintly on her palm where their blood had mingled. The covenant. The bond. Her blood already carried a trace of his essence. Perhaps that would be enough protection. "How much do you need?" she asked, voice steady despite her fear. "No." His eyes snapped open, blazing crimson even in his weakened state. "Ilara, I heard what you said. Now hear me." She shifted, cradling his head in her lap. "You saved me from Vivian's schemes, protected me when you could have simply fed and forgotten. You carried me through these passages even as poison consumed you." Her fingers brushed the dark hair from his forehead. "Did you really think I'd let you die in these forgotten catacombs after all that?" "It's not just about the blood loss," Cassius protested, though his voice had grown weaker. "The feeding, when we're injured, when the hunger is desperate, we can't always control it. I could kill you without meaning to." "Then don't." Ilara tilted her head, exposing the column of her throat. "The bond connects us. You can feel my heartbeat, my emotions. You'll know when to stop. You don't understand what you're offering. I'm offering you life." She met his gaze, unflinching. "The same thing Isolde would have done. The same thing the bond was meant to seal." Her voice softened. "Let me save you, Cassius. The way you've been saving me since the moment we met." For a long moment, he simply stared at her, conflict written across every aristocratic feature. She could feel his internal war through the bond, hunger versus honor, survival instinct versus 3 centuries of self-imposed isolation. Then, with a sound caught between a groan and a growl, his resistance shattered. "Forgive me," he whispered. He moved with the last reserves of his strength, pulling her closer. His lips brushed her throat, finding her pulse point with predatory precision. Ilara's breath caught as she felt his fangs, sharp as surgical steel, pierce her skin. The pain was exquisite. Not agony, but something more complex. A burning cold that spread from the wound through her entire body. She gasped, fingers tangling in his hair, holding him to her even as her instincts screamed to pull away. Through the bond, she could feel everything he felt, the relief as clean blood flooded his system, pushing out the blessed poison, the euphoria of feeding after decades of careful restraint, the desperate, aching need to take more, always more. But beneath the hunger lay something else. Reverence, gratitude, and an emotion so profound it had no name, the sensation of a soul recognizing its other half across an impossible gulf of death and time. Isolde. The name whispered through her mind, though whether it came from Cassius's thoughts or her own, she couldn't say. Memories flooded the space between them. His memories, bleeding into her consciousness through blood and bond. She saw Isolde as he had seen her, laughing in moonlight, her head thrown back with unrestrained joy, sleeping in his arms as dawn threatened, dancing at the masquerade, her eyes promising forever. And she felt his grief. 300 years of it, concentrated into a single moment. The absolute devastation of watching her burn. The centuries of walking through a world that had lost all color, all meaning. The gradual numbing of every emotion until he'd become little more than a ghost himself, haunting the dungeon where they should have begun eternity together. "I'm sorry," Ilara thought, not knowing if he could hear her. "I'm sorry you lost her. I'm sorry you've been alone so long." Cassius's response came not in words, but in sensation. A wave of emotion so intense it stole her breath. Then, with visible effort, he pulled away from her throat. His fangs retracted, and he sealed the wound with his tongue, the gesture oddly intimate. "Enough. He breathed against her skin. Anymore, and I won't be able to stop. Ilara sagged against him, suddenly aware of how lightheaded she'd become, but through the dizziness she felt something else. Cassius's strength returning, his life force swelling back to its full, terrible magnificence. The poison had been purged. He would survive. "Can you stand?" she asked, her own voice sounding distant. "Can you?" He caught her as she swayed, concern replacing the predatory hunger in his eyes. "You gave too much, even with the bond." "I'm fine." She wasn't. Quite. But she would be. "We need to keep moving." The hunters... A sound echoed through the passages behind them. Footsteps. Voices calling out in Latin. Prayers or incantations, meant to drive back the darkness. The hunters had entered the catacombs. Cassius rose, lifting Ilara effortlessly despite his recent weakness. "Hold on," he murmured. "We're almost there." Chapter 8. Sanctuary of Shadows. The abandoned chapel materialized from the darkness like a ghost made stone. Cassius kicked open the rotting wooden door, carrying Ilara across the threshold into a space that time had forgotten. Moonlight spilled through broken, stained glass windows, painting the floor in fractured colors, crimson and sapphire and gold scattered across ancient pews, thick with dust. The altar stood at the far end, its white marble cracked, but still bearing the remnants of carved angels, their faces worn smooth by centuries of neglect. "Sacred ground," Ilara murmured as Cassius set her down on one of the pews. "Can you even—" The sanctity faded long ago. He moved to the windows, peering out into the night beyond. "This place was deconsecrated decades before I was born. Now it's simply empty. Neither blessed nor cursed. Neutral territory." Ilara touched her throat where his fangs had pierced her. The wound had already closed, leaving only 2 small marks like a brand. Through the bond, she could still feel the echo of his hunger, the way her blood had sung through his veins, purging poison and bringing him back from the edge of true death. "How long before they find us?" she asked. "Hours, if we're fortunate. Minutes, if Vivian hired competent hunters." Cassius turned from the window, and in the moonlight, he looked almost ethereal, beautiful, and terrible in equal measure. The catacombs are a maze, but they have torches, blessed oils, and the certainty of zealots. They'll search every passage until they find us. "Then we fight." "We?" His eyebrow arched. "You can barely stand after what you gave me. And they're trained vampire killers with weapons specifically designed to end creatures like me." "The bond makes me stronger." Ilara rose on shaky legs, gripping the pew for support. "I can feel it. Your blood in my veins, my blood in yours. We're connected now." She met his gaze across the chapel's center aisle. "Tell me that's not worth fighting for." Something shifted in his expression, the careful walls he'd built over 3 centuries cracking just slightly. "You truly don't fear this? What we're becoming?" "What are we becoming?" Cassius moved toward her with that fluid grace, stopping just within arm's reach. "A covenant bond, even temporary, creates resonance between souls. You're feeling what I feel, seeing fragments of my memories. Soon you'll be able to sense my presence even when we're apart. Know if I'm in danger. Share my strengths." He paused, his voice dropping. "And my weaknesses? Like sunlight? The bond won't make you vulnerable to the sun, but you'll feel my pain when it touches me. Feel the burning as though it were your own skin." His hand rose, hovering near her face without quite touching. "That's why vampires rarely form bonds with mortals anymore. The empathy becomes overwhelming. Mortals break under the weight of immortal suffering. I won't break." The certainty in her own voice surprised her. Isolde said the same thing. The name fell between them like a stone into still water. She was wrong. The hunters killed her? That's different from... Is it? Cassius's hand finally made contact, his cold fingers cupping her cheek. She died because of what we were to each other. Died screaming my name while I was chained and helpless. That's what this bond costs, Elara. That's what loving a monster means. You're not a monster. I've killed. His thumb traced the line of her jaw. Hundreds, thousands, across 7 centuries. I've fed on innocents and watched them die. I've made choices that would horrify you if you knew the details. His eyes burned in the darkness. The only thing that kept me tethered to any semblance of humanity was Isolde, and when she burned, that tether snapped. Through the bond, Elara felt the truth of his words, the decades after Isolde's death when he'd become exactly the monster humans feared. The blood-soaked years of rage and vengeance, hunting the hunters who'd killed his beloved. The slow, painful climb back toward something resembling control. But you stopped, she said softly. You chose to stop? I chose emptiness instead. Isolation. These dungeons became my world because at least here, I couldn't hurt anyone else. He withdrew his hand, stepping back. Until you arrived and reminded me what it felt like to want something again. To hope. A sound from outside shattered the moment, the distinctive crack of a crossbow releasing. The bolt whistled through one of the broken windows, embedding itself in the pew inches from where Elara stood. The wood hissed and smoked where the blessed silver tip touched it. They've found us, Cassius snarled. More bolts followed, a rain of blessed silver that forced them both to drop behind the stone altar. Elara's heart hammered as she heard voices outside, at least 6 hunters, maybe more, surrounding the chapel. Lord Ravencroft, a man's voice called out, rough with zealous fervor. Send out the girl and we'll grant you mercy, keep her, and we burn this place to ash with both of you inside. Mercy, Cassius laughed, the sound devoid of humor. That's what they called it when they burned Isolde. Mercy. Elara grabbed his arm, feeling his muscles coiled tight as steel cables beneath the velvet coat. What do we do? I could fight my way through them. His eyes had shifted back to full crimson, pupils elongated. But not while protecting you. They'd use you against me, and I'd have to choose between saving me or saving yourself. She understood now. That's what Vivian had planned all along. Put Cassius in an impossible situation, force him to reveal just how much he cared about a prisoner who shouldn't matter. She's brilliant, I'll give her that. Last chance, vampire, the hunter shouted. The girl or your life. Cassius turned to her, and in his eyes she saw 7 centuries of pain crystallizing into a single, terrible decision. There's a third option, he said quietly. But you'll have to trust me completely. What option? The transformation. His hands gripped her shoulders. Not the slow, 3-night process. The emergency conversion. Painful, dangerous, with no guarantee you'll survive. But if it works... His voice dropped to a whisper. You'd be immortal, powerful, able to fight beside me instead of being a liability. Outside, she heard the hunters beginning to chant. Smelled lamp oil being splashed against the chapel walls. They were out of time. Elara looked into Cassius's ancient eyes and saw her future written there in blood and shadow and eternal night. Do it, she breathed. Chapter 9. The Crimson Rebirth. Are you certain? Cassius's voice carried a tremor she'd never heard before, not fear for himself, but terror of what he was about to do. Once I begin, there's no stopping. The transformation will either complete or kill you. There's no mercy in between. Outside, the hunters' chanting grew louder, their Latin prayers weaving through the night like chains meant to bind the unholy. Elara could smell the lamp oil now, acrid and thick, could hear it splashing against the chapel's ancient walls. I'm certain, she said, though her hands trembled. Cassius pulled her closer, one hand cradling the back of her head, while the other pressed against her spine. The emergency conversion requires a complete blood exchange. I drain you to the edge of death, then you drink from me. My blood will rewrite yours, cell by cell, replacing mortality with something else. His lips brushed her ear. It will hurt beyond anything you've ever imagined. Your body will fight the change. Some don't survive the fighting. But Isolde would have. Isolde was prepared. We had months to strengthen the bond, to ready her body for transformation. His voice cracked. This is violent. Rushed. The odds. I don't care about odds. Alara tilted her head back, exposing her throat once more. I care about surviving this night. About not letting Vivian win. About... She met his burning gaze. About having enough time to understand what this bond means. Something in Cassius's expression shattered. 300 years of carefully maintained distance crumbling in an instant. Forgive me, he whispered, echoing his earlier words, for the pain I'm about to cause you, for changing you into something you never asked to become. I'm asking now. His fangs descended, longer than before, gleaming like polished bone in the moonlight. But before he struck, his lips found hers in a kiss that tasted of desperation and ancient longing. She kissed him back, pouring every ounce of choice and certainty into the gesture. Then his fangs pierced her throat, and the world dissolved into sensation. This wasn't like before. This was consumption, total and absolute. Alara felt her life pouring out in a crimson rush, felt her heartbeat slowing as Cassius drank deeply, relentlessly. The bond between them blazed like white fire, connecting them so intimately that she couldn't tell where her agony ended and his ecstasy began. He was killing her. She knew it with perfect clarity, felt her vision darkening at the edges, her limbs growing cold and numb, heard her heart stuttering, struggling to pump blood that was no longer there. This is death, she thought with strange calm. This is what it feels like to cross over. Just as the darkness threatened to swallow her completely, Cassius pulled away. Through blurred vision, she saw him bite into his own wrist, saw his ancient blood, black as midnight, gleaming like liquid stars, well up from the wound. Drink, he commanded, pressing his wrist to her lips. Drink and live, Alara. Choose life. Choose me. Choose forever. His blood touched her tongue. The transformation began. It started as burning, not the gentle warmth of life, but the searing agony of something fundamental being torn apart and reconstructed. Alara's back arched as her body convulsed, every nerve ending screaming in protest. Cassius held her through it, his arms iron bands keeping her from thrashing herself to pieces against the altar. I know, he murmured against her hair, his voice thick with shared pain. I know it hurts, but you're strong, stronger than you realize. Fight through it. Fight for the other side. Through the bond, she felt his memories, flooding into her consciousness, not just images now, but lived experiences. 700 years of existence compressed into moments. She felt his first death, the transformation that had made him what he was. Felt his centuries of loneliness, broken only by Isolde's brief, brilliant presence. Felt his absolute terror that he was killing her, that history was repeating itself in the worst possible way. I'm not dying, she tried to tell him through the bond. I'm changing. Her senses exploded outward. Suddenly she could hear everything, the hunters' heartbeats outside, 23 distinct rhythms. Could smell their sweat and fear and zealous determination. Could taste the blessed oils on the air like bitter ash. The moonlight through the broken windows wasn't pale anymore but blindingly bright, every color spectrum visible at once. And the hunger. Oh God, the hunger. It rose through her like a living thing, consuming every other sensation. The hunters' heartbeats became a symphony of invitation, their blood calling to her with voices that promised relief from the burning, promised power and satisfaction and eternal fullness. Not yet. Cassius's voice cut through the hunger's siren song. You're too new, too unstable. If you feed now, you'll lose yourself to the bloodlust. You'll become what they fear. I don't care. The words came out wrong, her voice layered with harmonics that hadn't been there before. I know what you need. He pulled her face toward his, forcing her to meet his eyes. They glowed like twin flames in the darkness. But you're stronger than the hunger. Isolde was. You are. Prove it to me. Prove you chose this transformation for the right reasons. Outside, the hunters had stopped chanting. In the sudden silence, Elara heard the distinctive sound of flint striking steel. They were lighting the oil. Flames erupted around the chapel with a roar, orange light flooding through the windows. Heat pressed against the walls, seeking entrance. Within minutes, the ancient wood would catch. The whole structure would become a funeral pyre. Can you stand? Cassius asked. Elara tested her legs. They felt different. Stronger, yet somehow lighter. She rose easily, no trace of the weakness that had plagued her after the first feeding. Her body thrummed with supernatural energy, every muscle coiled and ready. What do we do? Cassius smiled, and for the first time since she'd met him, it held genuine joy. We show them what happens when you back two bonded vampires into a corner. He moved to the chapel doors, his form beginning to shift. Bones elongating, muscles expanding, wings unfurling from his back in a cascade of shadow. Together? He asked, extending his hand. Elara felt her own body responding to some instinct she didn't understand. Fangs descending, senses sharpening to impossible clarity, strength flooding her limbs like liquid fire. She took his hand, their blood bond singing with perfect synchronization. Together, she agreed. The chapel doors exploded outward in a shower of splinters and flame. Chapter 10. The Blood Moon. Rising, the hunters never stood a chance. Elara moved with a speed that defied physics, her newly transformed body responding to instincts coded into her blood by Cassius's ancient essence. She watched herself as though from a distance, dodging crossbow bolts that seemed to crawl through the air, disarming men twice her size with casual flicks of her wrist, her movements a deadly dance choreographed by 7 centuries of predatory evolution. But it was Cassius who truly terrified them. He descended upon the hunters like vengeance incarnate, his wings creating gales that extinguished their torches and scattered their formation. His claws, black as obsidian, sharp as broken glass, carved through blessed silver armor as though it were parchment. When he roared, the sound resonated with such primal fury that 3 hunters simply dropped their weapons and fled into the night. "The girl!" one hunter screamed, raising his crossbow toward Elara. "She's turned. The abomination has made her one of them." The bolt flew. Elara's hand shot up, catching it mid-flight. The blessed silver burned her palm, but the pain was distant, manageable. She crushed the bolt between her fingers, reducing it to splinters and twisted metal. "I chose this," she said, her voice carrying that strange harmonic layering. "No one made me anything. I am what I chose to become." The hunter's face went white. He reached for another bolt, but Cassius was already there, moving too fast for mortal eyes to track. A single strike sent the man crashing unconscious against the chapel's stone wall. Within minutes, it was over. The hunters lay scattered across the abandoned churchyard, unconscious, disarmed, or fled entirely, not a single corpse among them. Despite everything, despite the hunger screaming through her veins and the rage burning in her newly immortal heart, Elara hadn't killed anyone. Neither had Cassius. "You held back," she said, breathing hard though her lungs no longer needed air. "Why?" "They tried to burn us alive." Because you were watching. Cassius's form shifted back to something more human, his wings dissolving into shadow, his claws retracting. Because through the bond, I felt your horror at the thought of killing them. Your desperate hope that we could win without becoming the monsters they believe us to be. He moved toward her, cupping her face in both hands. You made me remember what it means to have mercy. A slow clap echoed across the churchyard. Ilara spun toward the sound, her new senses immediately cataloging the threat. A woman stood at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the circle of firelight from the dying flames. She wore a traveling cloak of deep burgundy, her face obscured by shadow, but something about her presence radiated power. Old power, ancient power that made even Cassius tense. How touching, the woman said, her voice, like honey, poured over razors. The great Lord Ravencroft, reduced to parlor tricks to impress his new fledgling. She stepped into the light, and Ilara's breath caught. The woman was beautiful in the way that poisonous things were beautiful. Perfect features that seemed carved from moonlight and malice, eyes that gleamed silver in the darkness, hair black as a raven's wing cascading past her shoulders. She couldn't have been more than 30 when transformed, but the weight of centuries hung around her like a cloak. Morgana. Cassius's voice had gone flat, emotionless. I should have known you'd be involved. Did you really think your little blood covenant would go unnoticed? Morgana tilted her head, studying Ilara with predatory interest. The moment you bonded with this mortal, every vampire within 100 miles felt it. The ancient temple sanctum awakening after 3 centuries of silence. The blood memory of Isolde Thornwick resonating through the ley lines. Her smile revealed fangs like needles. You've caused quite a stir among the old bloodlines, Cassius. This doesn't concern the courts, Cassius said, positioning himself slightly in front of Ilara. The treaty grants me autonomy in my domain. The treaty was written when you were properly isolated, neutered by grief and self-imposed exile. Morgana's eyes fixed on Ilara. But now you've created a fledgling, completed a covenant bond, awakened powers you swore would die with Isolde. She moved closer, circling them like a shark. That changes things. Through the bond, Ilara felt Cassius's fear, not for himself, but for her. This Morgana was something beyond the hunters, beyond mortal threats. This was a creature who'd walked the earth longer than empires, who remembered when vampires ruled openly and humans were little more than cattle. What do you want? Ilara asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Morgana's attention snapped to her, assessing. Bold. I like that. Isolde was bold too, before the zealots burned her. She stopped circling, standing directly before them. What I want, fledgling, is to ensure your creation doesn't destabilize the careful balance we've maintained for centuries. Cassius swore an oath after Isolde's death, that he would never create another vampire, never form another covenant bond, never risk exposing our kind to the hunter's attention again. That oath died with her, Cassius snarled. Did it? Morgana's eyebrow arched. Or did you simply decide it was inconvenient? She gestured toward the unconscious hunters. Already your reunion has drawn zealots with blessed weapons and fire. How long before word spreads? Before they realize the vampire lord of the blood dungeons has taken a companion? Before they come in greater numbers? Let them come, Ilara said. We'll face them together. How romantic. Morgana's voice dripped with mockery. But romance doesn't alter reality. The vampire courts have rules, Cassius. You know. This. A new vampire requires presentation to the council, approval, oaths of fealty. Her smile turned cruel. And given your history, given how catastrophically your last covenant ended, I doubt the council will be sympathetic. Are you threatening us? Ilara felt her fangs descend involuntarily, her body responding to the perceived threat. Threatening? Morgana laughed, the sound like breaking glass. Child, I'm offering you a choice. Come before the vampire court willingly. Let them assess your transformation, your bond, your worthiness to exist among the immortals. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Or refuse, and face the consequences of defying laws older than your bloodline. Cassius's hand found Alara's, their fingers intertwining. Through the bond, she felt his calculations, the odds of fighting, of fleeing, of protecting her against something as powerful as Morgana. When? He asked finally, his voice resigned. Tomorrow night. The blood moon rises at midnight. Morgana turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Cassius? Your mortal sister hired me to deliver the hunters. She's quite resourceful, that Vivienne. You should congratulate her on her initiative. She vanished into the shadows, leaving only her laughter echoing through the night. Chapter 11. Eternal Covenant. The vampire court convened in the ruins of an ancient cathedral, its spire reaching toward the blood moon like an accusatory finger pointed at heaven itself. Alara stood beside Cassius at the cathedral's center, acutely aware of the eyes watching them from the shadows. Dozens of vampires, perhaps hundreds, filled the vaulted space, their presence a weight that pressed against her newly heightened senses. Some perched in the rafters like gargoyles, others stood in the abandoned pews, perfectly still, their faces masks of aristocratic indifference. But their emotions bled through the darkness like perfume: curiosity, contempt, hunger, and something else. Fear. They feared what she and Cassius represented. Lord Cassius Ravencroft. A voice thundered through the cathedral, ancient and absolute. You stand accused of breaking your blood oath, of creating a fledgling without council approval, of forming a covenant bond forbidden by your own vow. At the altar stood a vampire who made Morgana look like a child. He wore robes of deepest black embroidered with silver thread, his face ageless and terrible, his eyes burning with power that predated Christianity itself. This was Nathaniel, First Lord of the Vampire Courts, the creature who had written the treaty that governed their kind. I broke nothing, Cassius replied, his voice steady. My oath was given in grief, under duress, while the ashes of my beloved still burned. It was never binding. You swore on the old blood, Nathaniel countered, on the covenant altar itself. Such oaths transcend grief or circumstance. His gaze shifted to Alara. And yet, here stands a fledgling wearing your mark, carrying your blood, bonded to your soul. Explain this contradiction. Alara felt Cassius tense beside her, felt his carefully constructed arguments crumbling. Through their bond, she understood what he'd been trying to protect her from. That vampire law was absolute, that creating her without permission carried a sentence of final death for them both. It was my choice, she said, her voice ringing through the cathedral with unexpected strength. Lord Ravencroft tried to refuse me, tried to send me away with only temporary protection. I demanded the transformation. Murmurs rippled through the assembled vampires. Nathaniel's expression remained unreadable. A mortal cannot demand immortality, he said. Transformation requires the sire's willing participation. Then he participated willingly. Alara took a step forward, away from Cassius's protective presence. Because I was dying. Because hunters had poisoned him with blessed oils, and my blood was the only thing that could save him. Because we had minutes before they burned us alive. She met Nathaniel's ancient gaze without flinching. He transformed me so we could fight together, so we could survive together. Is survival now a crime? Survival is necessity, Nathaniel allowed. But necessity does not negate consequence. He descended from the altar, moving with fluid grace toward them. The law exists for a reason, fledgling. Unchecked creation leads to exposure. Exposure leads to war. War leads to extinction. for both our kind and yours. Then change the law, Alara said. If it's so rigid that survival becomes a crime, if it punishes love and loyalty, then perhaps it's the law that's wrong, not us. The cathedral erupted in chaos. Vampires hissing, shouting, some laughing at her audacity. But Nathaniel raised one hand, and silence fell like a guillotine blade. Love, he repeated, tasting the word. Is that what you claim? After knowing Lord Ravencroft for mere days? After carrying his blood for less than a night? He circled them slowly, a predator assessing prey. Or is this simply blood bond infatuation, the chemical euphoria of transformation mistaken for deeper emotion? I dreamed of him before we met, Alara said quietly. Carried memories of a woman who died 3 centuries ago. Recognized his soul the moment I saw him. She turned to face Cassius, whose eyes had gone wide with surprise. I don't know if that's love or fate or the universe's twisted sense of poetry, but I know that I chose him, chose this, and I would choose it again, even knowing it might end tonight. Through their bond, she felt Cassius's emotions crashing over her like waves, shock, terror, and something so profound it had no name. His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. She carries Isolde's bloodline, he said, his voice rough with emotion. The woman I lost 300 years ago. The covenant we never completed. He faced Nathaniel directly. You were there that night. You saw what the hunters did. You watched them burn her while I screamed. His grip on Alara's hand tightened. Are you truly going to let them win again? Let zealots and broken laws destroy what we've somehow been given a second chance at? Nathaniel stopped circling. For a long moment he simply stared at them, his expression unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, a small, sad curve of his lips that held centuries of accumulated sorrow. I was there, he said softly. I held you back when you tried to throw yourself into the flames after her. Watched you break in ways that shouldn't have been survivable. He looked at Alara. And I see her in you. Not just the face, but the fire. The stubborn certainty that love matters more than law. Hope flared in Alara's chest. The council cannot simply excuse your transgression, Nathaniel continued. But neither can we ignore circumstance, or the fact that you both survived an encounter with Morgana's hunters without killing a single one. A restraint that speaks to control, not chaos. He returned to the altar, his robes sweeping across the stone floor. When he turned back, his expression had shifted from judge to something almost approving. The court decrees thus. Your bond is recognized, your fledgling accepted. But you will be watched, Cassius Ravencroft. Any exposure, any hint that your covenant threatens the treaty, and both of you face final judgment. His eyes glowed in the darkness. Do you accept these terms? Yes, Cassius said immediately. And you, fledgling, do you accept a life of shadows and blood? Of eternal hunger and immortal consequence? Alara looked at Cassius, at the creature who had saved her, transformed her, shown her what it meant to love so deeply that death itself couldn't sever the connection. She felt their bond singing between them, felt the promise of centuries stretching ahead like an unwritten story. I accept, she whispered. The blood moon reached its zenith, flooding the cathedral with crimson light. And in that ancient holy space, Cassius pulled Alara into his arms and kissed her, a kiss that tasted of blood and eternity and promises finally kept. 300 years of waiting ended. A new forever begun.